Hello friends, today we will discuss general exceptions in the IPC. Section 76 to 95 of the Indian Penal Code are general exceptions. Now what are general exceptions? If any of you is going to be practicing criminal law, I think it is very important for those of you to understand what general exceptions are from 76 to 95. This will be followed by the right to private defense, 95 to 106. Because these are the defenses that are generally mounted when we are defending an accused. Of course, we rely on the Evidence Act, on the FIR, on the evidence adduced by the prosecution. All of this form a very important part of the defense in a criminal case. But if we have mastered the general exceptions and we have mastered the right to private defense which follows it, then I believe we can become very good criminal defending lawyers. Equally, if you want to prosecute a criminal prosecution, then you would be able to know what are the grounds the defense is likely to take, so that you prepare yourself accordingly. So if you are going to be a public prosecutor or a defending lawyer, for both of you, general exceptions are very, very important. Today, I am going to take just 4 sections, section 76 to 79. Now, what are these? Section 76 says, if you believe that whatever you are doing, you are bound by law to do it. Now, this belief, this good faith that you have developed has not developed on account of mistake of law, because the law does not recognize mistake of law. You cannot say, I did not understand the law, so this happened. No. But if you do it on mistake of fact, you factually believe that you are bound by law to do a certain thing. And if you do it, then your defense is valid, then you are safe. So 2 things have to be made very clear. Whatever you do, you are feeling that you are doing because you are bound by law. You are obliged by law to do it. And that is a factual mistake you are making. You know the law, but you think that this particular action of mine is bound by law. It is not that you are mistaking the law. You are thinking that the law is something else altogether, and then you are taking a decision to act the way you have acted. For example, as the illustration to this is given, if a soldier, that is, let's say a policeman, there's a huge and violent mob, right? And this mob is attacking, throwing stones, burning down. It has got lethal weapons with which it is attacking. And a command is given by the superior officer to fire. Now that constable or head constable or whatever is bound by law to obey that command and to open fire on that mob. If in the process someone dies, the constable genuinely believed that he was bound by law to open the fire. He is not to be blamed. He is safe. Right? Similarly, an order has been passed to arrest Mr. X, and you go and arrest Mr. Y thinking he is Mr. X. Right? Now the court has asked you to arrest Mr. X, but you pick up Mr. Y. It's a mistake of fact, not a mistake of law. There is a valid legal order, but you think Mr. Y is Mr. X and you arrest Mr. X. You are not to be blamed. Fine. Now, the major case in this was Emperor versus Wajid Hussain, dating back to 1910, in the Allahabad High Court. What happened? 11 police constables had gone somewhere, and they had filed, evidence and FIR against the accused by fabricating evidence. The accused were innocent actually, but the constables had filed evidence, FIR, etc., etc., built up evidence. And this building up of evidence was mischievous because it was not true. Now, when they were brought before the court for their actions, the defense that these police constables took is, Sahab, our sub-inspector Sahab was there and he ordered us to do this and we were bound by law to obey him. Therefore, even though we have fabricated evidence, even that we have tried to trap people in a criminal case, people who were innocent, we were doing this on the clear-cut orders of our sub-inspector. The court then cited a very important section of the Evidence Act. And please, my friends, this section of the Evidence Act, section 105, holds true for the entire range of sections in private defense and general exceptions. I'll make this clear just now. The court may have cited it for this section, but section 105 of the Evidence Act, which was cited by the court, holds true for all your general exceptions, all your private defense. What does it say? That when a person is accused of any offense, the burden of proving the existence of circumstances bringing the case within any of the general exceptions is upon him. So, pehla part kya hai? What is the first part? If I am the accused and in my defense I am claiming कि sir, I was bound by law to do it, then it is for me to prove the circumstances whereby I genuinely was feeling in good faith that I was bound by law. And normally the court shall presume that such circumstances did not exist. So if these constables were going to mount that defense, that they were ordered by their sub-inspectors and they were bound by law, so two factors come into play. What is the first factor? They have to actually prove that such orders were given by their sub-inspectors. It is not for the prosecution to do anything here. It is the accused constables who will have to prove that specific orders were given by their sub-inspectors to fabricate evidence and they were bound by law to obey that order. That's the first part. What is the second part? In the normal circumstances, the court shall presume that no such orders were given by any sub-inspector. Do I make myself clear, friends? Right? So, although section 76 right up to 95 are defenses on various grounds, but in each ground it is important to remember that section 105 of the Evidence Act comes into play. You have to, number one, the accused has to prove that those circumstances actually existed with evidence, which made him feel that he was bound by law in this case. And secondly, in the normal course, the court, in the absence of such evidence produced by the accused, shall presume that these circumstances did not exist. I repeat, this section 105 of the Evidence Act applies throughout, from 76 to 95, general defenses. Now what, my friends, is the next section? The next section is when a judge who is acting judicially, in the exercise of his power, he gives an order, which the judge believes that power is given to him by law. So, number one, the judge should be acting in a judicial capacity, right? I cannot be a judge who is sitting at home. I suddenly see somebody on the road and say, hey, arrest him, I don't like his face. I am not acting judicially, right? Number two, that power which I am exercising, I should believe has been given to me by law. Now, take for example a judge who is handling civil suits. He is not empowered to try criminal cases. And suppose he takes cognizance of a criminal case. he cannot be believing that that power is given to him by law. He's acting judicially as a judge, right? But he's supposed to be a judge dealing only with the civil side. And he suddenly takes cognizance and starts proceeding with the trial of a criminal case. He's acting beyond his jurisdiction. And it is not arguable that he believes that he was empowered to do so by law. We must understand also what the word judge means. Section 19 of the IPC explains what is meant by a judge. Who is a judge? A judge is every person who is empowered by law, who has the authority given to him by the law, who has the sanction given to him by the law, right? Who to give a definite judgment in a legal proceeding. A definitive judgment is a clear-cut judgment. It has to be a speaking order, right? He has to give a definitive judgment. Look, I judge this way or I judge that way. Or if it is not a definite judgment, that means it is not the final word, there can be an appeal against it, right? Many cases, an appeal lies against the judgment. So it cannot be definitive. It cannot be the last word. In that case, even if it is not a definitive judgment, it is a judgment against which if an appeal is made, then if confirmed by some other authority, that judgment by a superior authority, by a superior court, that judgment would be definitive, right? So this is a judge. The judge has to be empowered by law. He should be acting in legal proceedings, which means he should be acting judicially. He should be acting in a legal proceeding. Number 3, he should give a judgment, right? And that judgment should be definitive. It should be clear-cut, final, the last word, unless the judgment is appealable, in which case the higher authority, if it confirms that judgment, that would again become definitive, right? So even if the higher authority, discards that judgment, doesn't matter. Had it confirmed that judgment, it would have been definitive. For example, I will explain this. You as a judge pass an order against X in a debt recovery case that X owes rupees 1,000 to Y with interest from this date. Now this is your definitive judgment. Having heard the trial, having heard the proceedings, having acted judicially, you give an order. You give a judgment. Rupees 1,000 debt has to be paid by X to Y with interest, right? Now this is a definitive judgment, but X goes in appeal to a higher court. Now the higher court can do two things. It can uphold your judgment or it can reverse your judgment. That does not mean that you did not act in a judicial capacity. You did. You gave a definitive judgment, which if the higher court had confirmed would remain a definitive judgment. Even if it did not confirm it and it rejected, that does not mean that the judgment you rendered as a judge was not definitive, right? So the famous case in this is a 2009 case of Surendra Kumar Bhatia versus Kanhaiya Lal and others. This is a Supreme Court case. Now what happened? The collector, who is also the specially designated, land acquisition officer. Most places, most states, collectors are also designated as land acquisition officers for the government. So what happened? In certain proceedings where land was to be acquired, this collector made an award under the provisions of the Land Acquisition Act 1894. Now what did the court say? That a collector acting as a land acquisition officer is not a judge. Why? Because acquisition is not a proceeding before a court. The collector is not functioning like a judge. What is he doing? Suppose land, a piece of land has to be acquired. So he is hearing what is its value, what can be its value, who is interested, who has a right, who is not interested, and having done all that, having ascertained the market value of that land, which is to be acquired for the purposes of the government, the collector makes an offer by way of award, right? So it is not a judicial proceedings. Therefore, if he is acting under the Land Acquisition Act, a collector is not a judge. Now, this is something we will have to remember throughout, that a judicial officer is a judicial officer only if he is acting as a judge. And then if he takes a decision in the capacity of a judge, believing that he is empowered by law to give that judgment, in which he hears both sides, there is a trial, evidence is adduced, there are arguments, and he gives a definite judgment, then it is okay. Then Section 77 comes into play, that judicial proceeding stands saved. But a collector, for instance, who hears certain matters in terms of the valuation of the land and then decides, by this is the final value for which the government should acquire it. He has not made a judgment. If I go in appeal against the collector's award and it goes to court, and the court hears me and it hears the collector and then decides in the matter, that is a judgment, right? So the next section that we will take up is act done pursuant to the judgment or order of the court. Okay. So this is very clear. If some person is acting as he has been directed by the judgment or order of a court of justice, until that order is valid and in effect, for example, there is a court order which says until the 7th of October, next October, Mr. X is allowed to enjoy possession of such and such a property, right? Until 7th of October, the court says Mr. X is enjoying possession of such and such a property. Then up to 7th of October, if Mr. X enjoys possession of the property, ultimately it may be proved that the property was not his. Ultimately, it may be proved that he was a trespasser. Ultimately, it may be proved that his possession was unlawful. But if up to the 7th of October, by the judgment or order or interim order of the court, he is in possession and enjoys the property, then he is safe, even if the court passing the order had no jurisdiction to pass it. For example, the property may lie in the jurisdiction of the district court of Saket, right? And by some mistake, the district court of, say, Karkarduma passes an order that Mr. X shall enjoy the property up to the 7th of October. Doesn't matter. If after that Mr. X enjoys that property, it is still not an offense, even though the court had no jurisdiction in the matter, right? Then we come to 79. This is about an act done by a person justified or by mistake of fact believing himself justified by law. Now I will compare. Section 76 said, whoever feels by mistake of fact, but not by mistake of law, that he is bound by law. Try and remember 76. The person who feels bound by law, and he feels that he is bound by law, not by mistake of the law, but by mistake of fact. He acts in good faith, bound by law. Here it is justified by law. I have not been ordered by law to do something. I have not been ordered by my legally superior authority to do by something, but I am doing something which honestly, in good faith, not by mistake of law, but by mistake of fact, I feel is totally justified by law. Take it. The illustration to this is also very good. It says, if Z, who is looking at A, thinks A is committing a murder. A is hitting somebody and A is committing a murder. Now Z is empowered by law to, or in good faith, what he does is, citizen's arrest, he catches hold of A and takes him to the Thana. It ultimately turns out that Z was acting in self-defense. He did not murder. He was only defending his body from a vicious, lethal, fatal attack by, say, Y. Okay. Now, A did not know this. He just saw Z and Y fighting, and he saw Y dying, and then he said, okay, Z is the murderer. I'll catch hold of him, take a citizen's arrest, and take him to the police station or the court. Okay. Now, why has A not committed an offense? Because he thought he was justified by law. There was no mistake of law. In good faith, he thought that, look, Z is committing a murder. I have the right to arrest him, and I have the right to take him to the police station. But the facts were different. Z was only trying to defend himself. Which right he has, as you will see later, when we come to the right of private defense, you will see that is a right which Z had. Now, perhaps the most famous case in this is the case of Raj Kapoor versus Lakshman. Raj Kapoor, you gentlemen and ladies would all know, Raj Kapoor was a very famous film actor, right? And he produced a picture called Satyam Shivam Sundaram. Very, very, very long back. Most of you would not have seen it. I don't know if most of you would not have been born in all probability at that time. But this was a famous picture of its time. And as per those times and as per the norms and society's thinking of that time, let us say the picture was slightly advanced. The movie was slightly advanced. Now what happened? When Raj Kapoor started screening this movie, somebody filed a case against Raj Kapoor saying that he has been displaying or having a picture, a film shown in movie theaters which is morally depraved, which is obscene, and because he has displayed or shown or cast whatever such a film in the film theaters, Raj Kapoor is to be blamed and to be accused of obscenity and immorality. Now, what was the defense that Raj Kapoor took in court? He said, "Sir, your lordship, every picture before being screened is given a certificate by the censors under section 5(1) of the Cinematograph Act." Right? He said, I got this censor's certificate, that is the approval to screen Satyam Shivam Sundaram acting under section 5(1) of the Cinematograph Act. So what? I have acted in good faith. I feel I have been justified by law in screening that picture. Where is the question of my being morally depraved or obscene or whatever? Because the board of censors had given a certificate. What did the Supreme Court say? That even though an act is forbidden, it does not always mean that the person who acted is guilty. Because there can be certain special circumstances where it is not an offense. And in this case, what are the special circumstances? Board of Censors had sanctioned the public exhibition, the public exhibition of the film. So naturally, the producer, Raj Kapoor, etc., had thought that they are protected because of section 79 of the IPC, that they are justified in law, in good faith. They thought they are legally justified in having the film screened in various movie theaters. Therefore, the Supreme Court held that regardless whether the movie was obscene or blatantly, bold or an unforgivable content, it may have been, the screening of that film may have been an offense or may not have been an offense. But what does it boil down to? It boils down to that a certificate had been given by the censor board under an act, the Cinematograph Act, and therefore Raj Kapoor was justified in feeling that the law had allowed him to screen the film. So it is immaterial whether it was obscene or whatever. He may have been guilty of obscenity, he may not have been guilty of obscenity. That's a separate case. But in this particular instance, the screening of the film, Raj Kapoor rightly felt he had the protection of Section 79 of the IPC. So I will briefly repeat. 76, bound by law. 75, as per the order of a court or a judicial proceedings, the collector case. 78, a judge giving a judgment in a judicial proceeding. And anybody is acting according with that judgment or order. And finally, acting when one feels in good faith and not by virtue of mistake of law, justified in law in doing what one is doing. So friends, I hope that we have been quite clear in this. And next time, we shall take up the next 4 sections of the general exceptions. Thank you very much.